Hi, I'm going to talk about the root injustice again, and hopefully in this version it'll reach somebody. It'll make more sense to somebody. Somebody will get it because I've repeated myself many times over the years, and definitely most people, for whatever reason, just don't get the validity and importance of what I'm saying. So I'm going to try one more time. I was inspired by a few things that happened recently. Basically, all of them were complaints about living in a society wherein the root injustice is in operation, and none of them saw it as such. None of them recognized or spoke about the root cause of the problem that either they were experiencing personally or that they were observing and complaining about. So I'll start with a quote which is related to this. It's from Aristotle. He said, masculine republics give way to feminine democracies, and feminine democracies lead to tyranny. Similar quote from a modern day author, G. Michael Hoff, is hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Many people talk about the cycle of, okay, you have this tyranny, and then there's a revolution, hopefully not communist revolution, hopefully more in the style of the American Revolution of 1776. And freedom is brought back to a large degree. But then time goes on, and then the tyranny increases again, and then it becomes so intolerable. You have another revolution, and the cycle repeats. And so, from what I've heard, what I've seen, people look at this cycle as if it's just kind of like a historical reality, like that it's just like part of nature, I guess you could say. Like they don't see any way out of it, right? They just think, well, this is just the way the world works. We're just always going to have this cycle. It's kind of inevitable. They might say, well, it's just a cause and effect dynamic wherein the good times cause people to, men in particular, become less wary of tyranny, for example, and uh, maybe give up practices like martial arts and firearms training and so on because they think, well, there's no need for that now. And then people in power that want more power then take advantage of the situation and become more tyrannical until it gets to a point of really extreme tyranny, which then calls for this extreme response. But I'm going to argue that this view that it's just like a inevitable cycle that you can't escape is false. It's ignoring the root injustice, which is the real cause of the cycle. It's similar to like a gardener who saw a little tree sapling and it was growing in a place that would be destructive if the tree grew to full size. For whatever reason, it was just in a spot too close to the house, or uh, it would shade out the vegetable garden, so you would be getting the food that you need. Whatever, for whatever reason, the tree is not going to be beneficial. Normally, planting trees is a good thing, but follow me here in this exception to that rule. So likewise, with this cycle that I was talking about with these quotes of Aristotle and this author, they're basically letting the tree grow to such a size wherein it's then extremely difficult to remove. Like you're going to need at least an axe or a chainsaw, and then even when you get the trunk down, you still got the stump, and that can be extremely difficult. So the point being that if you let something destructive grow and get stronger, you then have to take a more extreme measure to remove it, right? Similarly, like with the bodily health and immune system, right? Like the human body, I've heard, is normal to have like some cancer cells pretty much always present, but your immune system takes them out when they're small normally, your white blood cells and such, can handle just the minute number, the small number, and it's manageable, and they're able to easily remove them, and you don't even know what's going on inside your body, right? There's like an effortlessness to it, or a minor effort is necessary. So these are other examples of that same dynamic. So when a society or when a nation or a country gets to the point of being so tyrannical that it's intolerable and people rise up, like there's just many examples of throughout history, that usually occurred not overnight, right? Like it wasn't just like all of a sudden there was this fascist dictator or communist party that just came out of nowhere. It usually grew in size and strength over time. And the reason why it was able to grow and get stronger was because people tolerated it in its lesser form. Again, it would be like the gardener seeing the little tree getting bigger and bigger, a problem that could be more easily resolved, right? You could just pull it out with one hand, and that would be the end of it. You'd get the roots included, it's all gone, end of story, rather than letting it grow more, letting those roots go down even deeper into the earth. It's very much a perfect, I think, analogy for what goes on as far as governments. Same with cancer. It's we have all these parallels in our reality showing us the same lesson. Similarly, I heard a woman complain, and rightly so. When I'm saying people are complaining about these things, I'm not saying the word complain in a like critical way. Like I agree that it's something to complain about, like it's something to dislike, but I'm saying the complaining without recognizing the root problem is kind of it's unproductive, right? Like you're just kind of complaining about a problem rather than solving the problem, right? And it would be better to solve the problem than just complain about it. So another woman who I respect and think is very kind and intelligent, by the way, happened to be complaining about like her neighbor, who's like very intrusive, like has their house like right up on the fence line, and kind of seems to be invading her privacy by looking at her while she's in her garden and such, as well as just being too close for comfort, basically. And then also on top of that, I believe she was talking about like a local official talking about like building codes or whatever nonsense local authorities come up with as far as like what your house needs to be like and what your garden needs to be like and how tall your grass needs to be, all this micromanagement of your home, all of course like in the name of safety or whatever, that's usually what it is. Um, that's usually the excuse, but it comes down to the root injustice. Like, why is she having to deal with that? And why do these cycles repeat over and over? The reason is because the earth was, I believe, created by God. So if you don't believe in God, my logic will still hold up. The reasoning still holds, because whether you believe there's a creator or not, you would have to agree that humans didn't create the earth, right? Humans didn't create land and water, and the plants that exist. And, of course we have GMO plants now, but I'm not including those because I wouldn't want to use those anyway, being that they're very dangerous and unhealthy. But again, land, water, and seed, right? Organic, naturally occurring throughout all of human history has just naturally occurred, right? You're born on the planet, and then there it is. You're on this planet. You have air to breathe, there's these plants that you can use for food and building materials. There's water to drink and, use to grow your garden, right? It's all pre-existing in nature, right? So whether you believe in a creator or not, that's just a fact, right? It's pre-existing, not created by man. And these particular natural resources, land, water, and seed, and you could include the air as well, but I think it's not necessary in this talk to include that, since no one's really commodifying air, monopolizing air, really. Okay, land, water, and seed, right? These are natural resources that are necessary for survival, right? It's not like diamonds or gold or silver or whatever other, rocks and so on. It's not like other naturally occurring substances in that they are special to humans because we need them in particular to survive, right? Like if someone wants to start a homestead, what do they need? Well, they need some land, they need water, and they need seeds, right? Like those are the basics. If you have land, water, and seeds, you can be self-sufficient, right? Generally speaking, that's true, right? Those are the basic natural resources that we need to survive. So the root injustice is that it's not being recognized that should be a birthright. People just see these as resources, natural resources that are commodified and should be, just on the market for sale or like anything else. Not recognizing, well, yeah, these three in particular, though, are needed for survival, and that matters. Like that's not an insignificant element. That's not an insignificant factor or characteristic of these three things: land, water, and seed. Especially when we take into consideration the issue of some humans trying to control other humans, right? Because if you have control of the means of survival, then you can control other people, right? This is just basic reasoning, basic understanding, basic observation, right? You can enslave a person if they don't have food, clothing, and shelter, which come from land, water, and seed. They don't have the basic necessities of life, and you have them, right? Then you can say, okay, well, you got to work for me if you want to have these basic necessities of life, or you got to pay me in order to have these basic necessities of life. Additionally, the land is especially important because not only is it what you grow your food in, but it's also the space where you live, and therefore it's what enables you to have some autonomous space and privacy, right? Like if you're living in an apartment building, or even in a house with a neighbor, stone's throw away, you don't have your own you don't have privacy, you don't have your own sovereign space. So the land functions as, the foundation of food production, but also for personal space and sovereignty. Like, so many problems that people talk about, whether, it's city life, suburban life, or even eco villages or intentional communities, it all comes down to interpersonal problems due to simply the fact that people don't have their own space. And it just boggles my mind that people don't recognize that. Like, they keep complaining about a situation that is clearly caused by the individuals not having their own space. And yet I almost never hear anyone talk about that. You have intentional communities and eco villages and, folks trying to get those going. And instead of just recognizing that if everyone had their own space and own autonomy, like, you wouldn't have these issues, they try and fix it through endless meetings, and deliberations, and trying to have consensus on everything, and so on, and making more community rules, and they're trying to like structure out a fundamental root problem, and it never quite works out for most cases. That's why you have most eco villages, most intentional communities, and situations like that failing for any one population, right? You might have like new people coming in replacing the last group over and over, but as far as any one group having a long-term success, it doesn't happen, and mainly because the people didn't have their own space, right? So the land enables everyone to have their own space, right? How much more, peace can you have if you just simply have your own space, your own privacy? You don't have other people around disturbing you, invading your privacy, or just, even if they're pleasant people, you still aren't able to live necessarily the way you want to, just because of the lack of your own space and freedom in that space, right? So it's kind of a long-winded, roundabout way of making a basic observation that if everyone had some private space, it would be pro-harmony, right? Like, it would increase harmony in the world and decrease disturbances and people complaining about those disturbances due to that root problem of not having the space, right? So the land has that function as well. But then also the sovereignty side of it solves the whole problem with the political cycle. And this is the blunder that folks that talk about this cycle are missing. They don't see it as, okay, after the revolution, they basically what that amounts to is cutting down the tree to a small size again. And then it just starts growing again. And then they're like, oh, look what happened. It grew back. Like it's like a surprise. Or these folks that see it as this natural cycle, in a sense, they're right. It is natural for it to grow back again, but it isn't necessary. Like, again, you can remove the tree altogether. You don't have to have it keep growing back. Like, if you get it out by the roots, it's not going to keep growing back. But yet they keep the roots in, they'll cut it back and they'll be like, oh, look how much smaller this tree is, parallel to like, oh, look how small we've made the government. Isn't it much better now? Now it's the way it should be. Now we have our fundamental freedoms. But you don't actually. It's still that evil root, which is setting up a ruling class that has the right to abuse, right? That denies you your personal sovereignty, denies you your birthright of sovereign land, water, and seed to have your own sovereign homestead and form voluntary communities. So it's against that, and so therefore is abusive, right? It's denying you true freedom, and it's stealing from you your birthright. So that's abusive. And so you're keeping an abusive root in the ground, and you've cut it down to a lesser size, and you think, oh well, that's good now. Now we set it right. And then sure enough, it grows bigger because power corrupts, and because evil doesn't turn into good. Evil just tends to further, propagate evil and grow in an evil manner, which is exactly what we observe, in political history to this present day. And yet people don't recognize it as such. Again, they don't see that it's the same bad root regrowing over and over. And what they should do is, yes, cut it down to size to the point where you can easily remove it completely and just get rid of it altogether. It's like the famous photo of the Chinese man who stood in front of the tanks that were on their way to Tiananmen Square, right? It's like at that point, I mean, he was extremely brave, right, in what he did, and he was able to actually stop the tanks from moving forward for a time. But the point being, well, what happened to him soon after? Like, he was surely, bad things would probably happen to him very soon after that by Chinese, communist officials. And he did what he could, but ultimately, right, the tanks were too much. And so the point is, like, when it gets to that point, it's like you have to take extreme measures. Like, just standing in front of the tank isn't going to be enough anymore. But how did that situation get to that point? How did it get to this, a parade of tanks, run by communists? Well, it started with people accepting a ruling class, which at the time, earlier could have been seen as less abusive, and people thought of it as just like a good thing, and so you have this, for various reasons, people think it's just on a political or social level necessary, or, you have Christians that have been misled by the false apostle Paul, who, says that governments are basically divine and necessary. And so people see it as this necessary evil, but there is no necessary evil. Like that's false morality. That's a false understanding of good and evil, which is what leads to humanity's downfall, right? In the Garden of Eden, you had the tree of knowledge of good and evil with the devil on it, giving a distorted version. And one key example of that is telling people, oh, well, having this abusive system in place isn't really bad. Or it's kind of bad, but it's a necessary evil. So you just gotta, like, be a 24/7 activist, and if everyone does that, then if everyone votes, then we're gonna keep it in check, and it's gonna be great. Which is just false. Any form of abuse is not beneficial, and if you set up a system of abuse that's automatic, that you're just born into and have to pay into automatically via extortion, that's even worse. It's just you're just letting that tree grow and grow and grow until it gets to the point where, in order to remove it, you have to take drastic measures that wouldn't have been necessary if you would just recognize it at the beginning. And how do you recognize something like that at the beginning? Well, you just look at it on a neighbor to neighbor level, right? Imagine I've used this example before, but I'll use it again because it's a good one. Imagine you are on a ship, and you get lost at sea, but then you find an island, it's uninhabited, but and then the ship burns down, or whatever, goes shipwreck, and so you're on this island with a bunch of, maybe, a couple dozen people, and you have no way of getting off the island or anything like that. So it looks like you're just going to be on this island for a while, or maybe permanently, right? What would be the right way to handle the situation? Would it be to set up a system of extortion and a ruling class, and or would it make more sense to just say like, okay, everybody find a spot that you like, and if you both like the same spot, let's try and be civil about it, and have a talk about it and see if we can all come to a compromise in situations like that. And so we'll all find like a spot on the island that we can call our own. That'll just be our autonomous space, and um, you know is private to us. If anyone wants to enter that space, they have to get our permission first. And then we'll all gather. We'll look around and see what food is already available, and we'll just share it with each other fairly. Everyone gets a fair share of it. Of course, fresh water, everyone gets the fair share that they need. Wouldn't that be like just the normal? I think that would be the normal, even though it's not like normal in human society, so-called civilization. Wouldn't that be just the sane thing to do? Wouldn't that just be like the reasonable, good way to handle the situation? I would say yes, of course. If one of those people on the island was like, well, you know what, I think I want to be the president or the king of this island, and I'm going to set all the rules, and you basically just have to follow me, and I'm going to make a couple of you my tax collectors, and set up some political type system. Like, I think a lot of people initially, if the situation was starting from scratch like that, would be like, I don't know about that, Joe. Like, I don't. I'd rather us all just be on the same playing field here, and you can be king of your own little piece of the island, that's your home there, but you're not going to be the king over all of us. I don't think we need to set up a ruler or a ruling class. How about we all just consider ourselves sovereign individuals, and that this island, which pre-existed and none of us created and has certain things that are necessary for survival, why don't we just share those things evenly, because we all need them to survive, and none of us created them, so none of us can really claim a property right to it exclusively, right? Because none of us created it, and we all need it to survive. That's the basic reasoning. Like, that's the basic view that I've tried to communicate probably hundreds of times, and I don't know why it's just not understood. But hopefully, maybe one or two people out there will hear this and get what I'm saying, and get it, and get the validity of it, and get the correctness of it, and then can share the idea with others as a real solution to the problems that we keep facing, because we just keep getting the same karmic feedback from that evil root, the evil foundation of the society that needs to be rejected and replaced with a just foundation, which is recognizing everybody as sovereign individuals, recognizing land, water, and seed as birthrights needed for survival, and autonomy and freedom and privacy and peace, and making that the foundation. I've never heard any good reason why that's not the solution. And, I guess I'll just end it there. All right. Thank you for listening.